I'm Kevin Levi Green, and this is the Quiet as It's Kept podcast. I am the choreographer for Techmoja Dance and Theater Company, based in coastal North Carolina, and I want to invite you on a journey as my dance company creates a new work exploring sexual trauma and silence in the Black community through the lens of Southern Blackness. I want you as the listener to understand why we are undertaking this work and what we hope to accomplish with it. I've asked my friend and mentor, Reverend Dierdre Parker, to join us as well. Somewhere along the way, Black stories are left out. So Quiet as It's Kept is a call to action. It's a representation of Black experience that we don't talk about, that always remains taboo. Today, I'd like to share a little about who I am and where I grew up. I think where we come from informs our artistic practice. It informs the way we go about our lives and the choices we make. I would just say that it's very important that we don't shy away from where we come from, but that we embrace it and take the lessons we have learned from it and sometimes revisit it. Because I know every time I revisit, I feel like I get some form of rejuvenation that helps me move forward. And though some of it may bring tears, and some of it may bring laughter, it's still home, even though I have some memories there. I grew up in Bolivia, North Carolina, population 193. On one side of the town, you had the Black community, which consisted mostly of my family, cousins, aunts, uncles. And on the other side, you had the white community. There was no real conflict. It was just understood that you lived where you lived. A lot of people would probably say that Bolivia is not a place to write home about, but I absolutely love the charm. It's a lot of trees, lots of fresh air and oxygen. It's full of farmers and fishermen and land that has been passed down from generation to generation. And I'll never forget my grandmother saying this. She said, "If you have your land and you're happy doing what you do, then you're wealthy." When I was younger, my grandmother lived about half a mile from us up this dirt road. And I remember she had chickens, pigs, and even a horse. She would make my brother and I work with her in the garden quite often. And I would begrudgingly go because even at a young age, I didn't like getting dirty. I saw it as punishment. But as I've gotten older, I realized it was probably one of the most beautiful things that I could have done. And the time I got to spend with her was irreplaceable. I remember this so vividly. I would get home from school, and I remember there was this verdant yet shaded path that led to her home. You would walk through it, and about halfway, you would hear the sound of the dogs barking. And I'm like, okay, I'm almost there. I would approach her stairs, which were maroon and dust covered, and I would walk up the stairs, and I would knock on the door, and my uncle, we called him Bobo. My Uncle Bobo would open the door, and I'd always say, "Hey, Uncle Bobo." And he would say, "Hey, Kevin." And I would walk into the house, And from the back room to my left, I would hear, Calvin. And it was my grandmother. And God rest her soul, my grandmother could never say my name. She always called me Calvin. I think she thought she was saying Kevin, but it didn't matter. She would come out, she'd sit, and we would gossip about everyone in the neighborhood. I had to have a song ready, I had to have a choreographed piece ready, and a monologue. And I would do that every day when I got home from school. And she would sit there and watch me. In some ways, I look back at it and I'm like, wow, she had a lot of patience, but she was always entertained. And so I would do that. She would let me entertain her. Most of the time, I picked a straight up musical theater song that she probably had no clue what it was. But then sometimes I would try to make sure that I sung something that she related to. I was really into older music, so I would do Duke Ellington, Mood Indigo, or Solitude. Sometimes I would try to make sure that the contrast between the dance and the song was different. I would make sure that I would do a ballad for the song and I would do an upbeat dance or vice versa. They say into your early life romance came. Smoking, drinking, never thinking of tomorrow, nonchalant, diamond shining, dancing, dining with a man in a restaurant. Is that all you really want? No, sophisticated lady. My mother, she was on dialysis. This is a very sore subject for me because I'm the reason why my mother was on dialysis. When I was born, she experienced a level of toxemia, and they told her that if she had me, that was one of the risks. And she had me, and she called me her miracle baby because she said she would have never imagined not having me. So when I was in elementary school, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would leave early and go sit with her at the dialysis center, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. They used to say I was attached to my mother's hip, and I was. I always wanted to make sure she was okay. But there was this one particular time I was at my grandmother's house again. I was getting ready to start performance and the phone rings, and it's my mother, and she's saying, Kevin, you need to come home. They just called me. I have a kidney. They've got a kidney. It's a match. I cried because I was scared. I didn't know what that meant. You know, I'd watched Steel Magnolias, which was not the movie to watch before that. And I remember my father turned on his flashers and we were driving super fast. We got pulled by the police. And even when he explained that the doctors told us that we had to be there at a certain time, the police officer held us up and gave us a ticket and didn't care. Anyway, we get there. She has the transplant. I remember seeing her and she's got all these tubes in her. And I'm terrified because I think that there's something really wrong, but nothing's wrong. And it was a successful transplant. She named her kidney Bill. And so we had to make sure that we didn't bump into her and we protected Bill. I would say my childhood was very joyous because of my immediate family, mother, father, grandmother, and brother. However, there were dark moments in my childhood. I I am a survivor of sexual trauma, and between the ages of 6 and 11, I was forced into things by people that were close to me, but not in my household, not my immediate family. But I see them today, and I was told that if I ever said anything, that all kinds of things would happen. One thing that I will never forget is some of the people who did some of the traumatic sexual things. They called me Kevalina, the ballerina. Instead of worrying about what happened, I was more worried about how I was being dishonest to my parents. Childhood trauma and abuse makes it very difficult for you to trust anyone. And so, as a young adult, I had a hard time trusting people. I had a hard time being open with people. I always felt like I had to keep all of that bottled up inside. And it really stripped away the childhood innocence. Quiet as It's Kept branched mostly from my openness about my personal situation when it came to sexual trauma. And when I shared that with my company, it made them passionate about the project because some of them have had experiences too. And I think we have been doing this type of work where we're touching on these subjects that people tend to skirt over. And we're in the process of facing them head on and making them accessible. Representing something through a performing arts lens makes it digestible in a way that all kinds of people can grasp. The arts is beautiful in that way. As I continue on this journey, I wanted to bring in a very good friend, mentor, auntie, the Reverend Dierdre Parker. Hi, Miss Dee.
Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm good. Can you tell everyone a little about yourself?
Let's see, a little about me. I am a poet, preacher, author, speaker. I am the pastor of Terrell's Chapel, AME Zion Church in Pittsboro, North Carolina. Nana to 6, mother of 3, wife of 1.
Wow. Okay, well, today I wanted to enlist you in conversation about this work, Quiet as It's Kept, and the challenges that it presents as we continue to, research and bring the work to fruition. I think I'm really interested in your experiences and thoughts coming from the faith community, like about why this conversation is hard to have in Black communities.
Well, from the faith perspective, and you are speaking with almost a unicorn because I am a woman pastor. And I think that a lot of the times these conversations are not had within the faith community because the faith community is largely patriarchal and men are not comfortable with having conversations like this because some of their own behaviors may be called into question. And so nobody wants to be the bad guy. As we know, as the Me Too movement picked up steam, people were feeling that men were being attacked because societally, certain behaviors towards women are perfectly acceptable. And I think that therein lies the rub. as I was preparing to talk to you, I was thinking back about when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be very graphic because you know how I do. I'm going to be honest. And I remember people talking about, boys talking about running trains on girls, right?
Oh my goodness.
And that is basically gang rape. And it was talked about as if it was some kind of comedic play, talked about as if, you know, the girl deserved it because she was whatever, or she wanted it, or, and it was all talked about as if it was a joke. I never found it funny, but I think until sexual assault, sexual harassment, until it is addressed from a neutral standpoint, when we understand that you should not be teaching girls how not to get raped. Boys should be taught that no means no. Boys should be taught to keep your hands to yourself. And in the faith community, addressing it is not something that I've seen a lot of. I address it because the Bible addresses it. There are specific stories about cases of rape and how they were handled. And specifically in the case of David's daughter and son, Tamar and Amnon. Tamar was David's daughter, and so Amnon was his son, but they had different mothers. They both had the same father. Amnon was in love with his sister, who was a virgin. It says in the text, she was a virgin and he could not do anything to her. So he had a friend who actually asked him what was wrong, and he told him what was wrong. I love my sister Tamar. I don't know what to do. So he told him to lay on the bed, act like he was sick, and ask the king, their father, if she could come in and cook him a meal with her own hands. When she came in to cook him the meal, he raped her. Once he raped her, he kicked her out like she was nothing. When she went and told her other brother, the other brother said, "Be silent, my sister." And I think that that is the key. Women are always told to be silent. Anybody who's sexually assaulted, whether it is a woman or a man, because men can be sexually assaulted too, are told to be silent. And it is the silence that incubates the fear. So you know how people always say, well, why didn't she say it sooner? Who wants to tell something that, first of all, was horrific? And I speak from experience. You tell people that, and they try to find out how it was your fault, how you were complicit when clearly you were not. And even if you said yes and then changed your mind to no, you have a right to that.
Well, you know, you brought up a very good point with the story you selected.
Amnon and Tamar.
Yeah. Hmm. It brings up the idea of sexual assault, sexual misconduct, sexual trauma in the family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you grew up where I grew up,
Right.
not too far from, you know, where I grew up, or we weren't too far from each other. I mean, obviously in different times.
Yeah.
You grew up with my mother.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there's so much beauty in our community, but there's definitely trauma.
Yes.
Growing up in a small rural community, betrayal is hard when everyone is at the table.
Yes.
And so I think I want to go into the conversation around sexual trauma as it relates to family, because I can also speak from experience when it comes to that.
Yeah. This story of Tamar is a prime example. When a child is, and you know, you were the director of my one woman show, so you know all my details, you know all my stuff. But when a child or whatever age says, "This is what happened to me, someone touched me inappropriately," it seems to me that the first reaction is to protect the offender and not the child, or not the person who has been molested or raped or what have you. And I think that what we believe about people is what causes us to do that. But we know that we are multifaceted organisms, human beings. We have many facets to our personalities, and there may be a person who might show kindness and joviality to other people. And that's all they see. But that doesn't mean that they are not a predator, a sexual predator, especially someone who is in a family and has done it over generations, knows how to single out a child that would be a potential victim. They know how to set it up, with candy. In my case, that was candy and change, because my great grandfather had a store that was right on the corner. And if you had 2 quarters, you could get a rock and roll gingerbread cookie and a soda with 2 quarters. So if somebody's offering you 2 quarters and you're always told you obey the adults, especially those in your family, then it's almost a setup. And at a time when things are different now, because people teach their daughters and they teach their sons to tell. They teach them, if someone touches you inappropriately, you let me know. You tell me. It is never right. But that was not the kind of education that I received as a kid. When you are in a situation where there are 7 children and 2 working parents, the grandparents become the caregivers in my case. And so if there is a predator in that situation, they actually have a lot of leeway. It's an open secret in some families where people will say, you stay away from him. Don't let him hug you too close. Or, that kind of thing. Don't sit on his lap. These types of things. It's because people know of the predatory behavior. But I must say, at least in my time when things were segregated, if you call the police on your Black male family member for something that happened to you, one of two things could happen: absolutely nothing, or he could end up dead.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this may be one of the things that make it comfortable
Mm-hmm.
for those types of secrets to remain secret.
Well, that's where the title of the piece actually came from, an experience very much like the open secret that you're speaking of. The Southern vernacular,
Yep.
quiet as it's kept.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that there's something that's not right about it, and everyone knows it, but they're not saying.
Exactly. Because nobody wants to step on anybody else's toes. And honestly, especially in the lives of Black people in the late 60s and even early 70s, and I'm sure even now, we try to protect each other in our communities. We don't want to reach out to someone outside of our community because, number one, the level of respect is not there. And who wants to, after having been victimized, want people to say, well, what were you wearing? What did you do? How were you acting? Why were you over there? Where did you sit? Why did you stand up? These kinds of things. When you are broken, nobody really understands the brokenness that comes from being violated in that way unless they have experienced it. You can sympathize and empathize all you want to, but you don't understand how the self doubt, the self blame, the guilt, the shame, these things compound. And then when you go to someone that you think you can trust and you reveal that and they question you, then all of those, the self doubt, the questions that you had for yourself, then it makes you feel like, well, it must have been my fault. I must have done something wrong. What must I do to fix myself? I must be broken. I must be deficient. This would not have happened to me if I had not. And so all of those things just really make it almost impossible. I kept my secret for a long time. And you know that I was met with some unhappy family members. But even when this happened to me again, when I was an 18-year-old college freshman, I did not tell anybody until I was in my 30s. Nobody knew why I dropped out of college. Nobody knew why I stayed in my room and never came out and never went to class again. Nobody understood why I wore baggy clothes, why I put on weight because that I'm short. And I only weighed about a buck 05 soaking wet. And so a 6'2" football player and a 5'1", 103-pound me, I didn't have a chance. And so I've put on weight because now it gives me a little more substance. And I feel more apt to protect myself from some such physical attack. I mean, Kevin, it is a plethora of reasons why people don't tell, why people offend. 9 times out of 10, if somebody is a sexual predator, they have become a predator because they were a victim. That happens very often. And so I think that as quiet as it's kept, it should not be kept quiet. And what we as a society have to do is create an environment where people are comfortable and supported as they reveal these traumatic things. I can remember certain young ladies that were in my neighborhood whose mothers were single and their boyfriends came over. They would come to school and laugh, I guess, because they didn't know how to handle it, about the fact that their mother's boyfriend raped them. But they wouldn't tell the mother, but they told the friends. And the friends would maybe tell their mothers, and the mothers would say, that ain't none of your business. You stay out of that. And I know a specific incident of this. This is not something that I'm just like grabbing out of air. I don't want to call people's names because I've learned that I don't have a right to tell anybody else's story but mine. But I've seen that. I've seen those things. And I think that until we are able to acknowledge it, and it has to be done within our communities. Somebody coming from outside of our community and trying to come in with trauma-informed care and all that, that's great. But and I know that outsiders are not trusted.
Well, I think one of the things you touched on about why you didn't come forward
Mm-hmm.
until you were in your 30s resonates with me, not because I didn't feel like my parents, I never felt that they would blame me or ask me what I did.
Mm-hmm.
But I think most of it at that time in my life was not wanting to be the boy who got raped,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so I tried really hard to not show any of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it did take a toll on me. It caused me not to trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I said earlier on that it was the first time I had a real experience of dishonesty
Mm-hmm.
because I felt like I wasn't being honest to my parents,
Mm-hmm.
and I never, they went to the grave never knowing
Mm.
because I now am at a place where I feel like I can talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that I wish I could change. But, we grow and we move how we feel comfortable. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm. But I can tell you this, having known your parents, I know that even now, I believe that spirits are eternal. So I believe even now they can offer you support
Hmm.
as you journey through this. You draw from what you know about them, the things that they've said, the comfort that they've given you in the past. And that, because spirits are eternal, is still available to you, I believe.
Hmm.
So I applaud you for having the courage, because it does take courage to discuss these things publicly. That's our responsibility as artists, is to tell the truth, is to begin the hard conversations, is to expose what has been hidden under the rug as quiet as it's kept.
I know that our experiences, while they are in the same vein, as far as sexual trauma,
Mm-hmm.
I know that they are different. But I think I'm I don't know how to ask this.
Just come right out with it. You know me. Ask your question.
I'm interested in knowing. your opinions on sexual trauma as it relates to the survivor being a young man.
I think that, again, this is an area where we need to broaden our way of thinking because the reality is there are probably just as many young men who have been traumatized in that way in their childhood. Let me not say in that way because I'm not afraid to say have been sexually assaulted. Men have been sexually assaulted. Young boys are sexually assaulted. The biggest problem is that it knows no gender, it knows no age, it knows no socioeconomic status. Um, in my opinion, evil is evil, and that is what we battle in the world, light and dark, and that is definitely darkness. And darkness like that, unfortunately, I think it's spiritual. It's related to the individual's spirit, what they have experienced, what has been poured into them, how they have been traumatized. I believe that we all have a level of trauma living in this, especially people of color. We all experience trauma on a daily basis, and how we live after the trauma,
Hmm.
whether it's a male or a female who has been sexually traumatized or assaulted, we carry some very similar things. Like you said, we find it hard to trust. Um, we protect our physical bodies. We protect our physical space a lot. We have a lot of blame. We have experienced a lot of self doubt, all of these different things. But I think, being honest, I think that for men, it is more difficult because of how we educate people on gender roles, you know? And so if a man is sexually assaulted, whether he is sexually assaulted by another man or a woman, then that person's masculinity, their manness is called into question. And I don't think that is fair. That's just another layer to the traumatization, I think, because women don't necessarily get that because women are expected to be victims and therefore victimized. But men are expected to be victors and therefore victimizers if there's victimization. You see what I'm saying? So I think that it adds another level of secrecy
Hmm.
to the whole thing. So you already got the secret that you don't want to tell anybody. Then you got the secret that as a man or as a boy, you were overpowered by someone and you're supposed to be the hunter gatherer, the powerful one. And so that is another level of stigmatization that is added, which is certainly unfair because nobody goes around trying to find ways to be a victim. I don't think they do.
I agree. And another question I have for you is, Techmoja, the dance company, is taking on this project. And I guess I'm curious to know your thoughts on that. Why do you think it might be important for Techmoja, or why Techmoja should be doing this work?
Well, Techmoja, first of all, like I said earlier, as an artist, you have a responsibility to society to speak your truth in a way that transcends all of that race, all that other stuff, class, gender, all of that as artists. But there are some things that do need to be addressed through the specific lens of culture. And as a company that is primarily African American and a director who is African American, I think that it will give the African American community a wider lens through which to view this situation of sexual trauma. And I think that it's awesome that you have the courage to do that because, again, so many need you to speak for them in your dance, in your movements. And words are not always the appropriate way to understand something. That's what's beautiful about dance. I've watched you, Kevin, over the years, and I've seen you evolve and I've seen you grow, and I see that your expression when you dance is so focused and it is so intense that I think that you being a member of the Black community, being who you are, you being an artist, you having this experience, it is a unique convergence of communities that you're reaching out to that may otherwise overlook this or sweep it under the rug or say, I don't want to talk about that. I don't have time to talk about that. I got other stuff going on. My life is full of other stuff. I'm trying to keep these lights on. I don't have time, but you create a space where we can see it through another lens. And I think that's very, very important.
Wow, that was beautiful. It was. It's got me over here all teary eyed. I've had a really rough morning.
You too?
Yeah, I got up and I went for a ride and I cried for 30 minutes because I miss my parents so much.
Listen to me. We've had the same kind of morning. Hello. But it's okay because now we were able to have this conversation from a place where we could tap into our emotions. And I think that sometimes what we do is we want to shield our emotions as we interact with people because of what we've learned from our trauma. So we put on the happy face and we smile and we make everybody else feel good. And the people around us feel good. They feel comforted. I even put on my soothing voice so that other people will feel comfortable. You see what I'm saying? That's what we do, but it's what we've been taught by our trauma. But there comes a time when you need to be able to just feel what you feel, and that's okay.
Mhm.
It's okay to feel what you feel, even if it's something that makes you cry. Tears are chemically designed to make you feel better. So when you don't cry, you are depriving yourself of something that is already in you that could cleanse and release some of the anxiety and all of the things that are inside. So good for you for taking that moment for yourself to be human.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And something else I want to know is, I obviously I don't have all the answers, right? I'm learning as I'm going through this process. If you had to offer up anything that you think Techmoja should do around this project for the community,
Hmm.
what are some things that you feel that I could tap into and maybe examine that I may not have already thought about?
Hmm. Well, I think that it's important to maybe have something that is, I don't know if what you're doing is going to be geared toward adults, but I would love to see something that was children friendly because a lot of us are traumatized as we're younger. And then we have this whole life that we are trying to work through this thing that has shaped us and or has broken us. And if you're able to get this before young kids so that they can see it in a way that they would understand it and realize that it's not normal, that would be my suggestion. If there's a way that you could do that in a way that it's children friendly and maybe even create a talk back after they see it with counselors available if necessary. I think that when we are able to let them know that this that happened to you was not your fault, this that happened to you was a bad thing. But as you can see, here I am. I have overcome it. And I do all these great dancing things. And maybe you can do that too. So I think if you're able to do something like that to get it before kids, I think that would be great.
Well, it's the the piece is born from interviews I did
Mm,
with people in coastal North Carolina. And so there are stories that touch on childhood memories.
hmm
And so there are a couple of vignettes that will, well, I don't really want to put a number on it. There are vignettes
Okay. Okay.
that will address that perspective
Well, I think
as
that's
well.
that's perfect. So there you go.
And definitely at the end of each performance, I want to do a talk back. And I definitely want to have counselors there in case people are triggered,
Exactly. Exactly.
because this can be triggering. It's already triggering for me. I mean, I'm emotional every other day when I think about it.
But Kevin, I want you to continue this journey because it is a journey. And even for me, I'm 58 years old now, but it is an ongoing journey. It is a peeling back of layers. It is an unraveling that will continue throughout your life. You will have good days, you will have bad days, you will have setbacks, but that's okay. Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. It's not going to always feel good, but the work that you are doing is so important to future generations. So you keep at it and know that it is all worth it. It is all worth it when we help people get free. It is all worth it if you say one thing and you touch one person to the point where they are able to live their life in a better way. It will set people free.
Wow. Are there any other things that you would like to say or share?
I would say anybody who is listening to this, if you have experienced sexual trauma, childhood sexual assault, rape, whatever it is, get some counseling. I, as an ordained elder in the AME Zion Church, want you to know that you can have Jesus and a therapist too. That's it.
Well, thank you very much for your time
You're very welcome.
and for having this conversation with me.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me. I appreciate everything that you do. I appreciate your work, and you keep going because that is your destiny.
Can you tell everyone how they can find you or follow you?
Sure, you can follow me. My website actually is www.diva, the number 2de, divatude.com. You know that I operate under the name Diva. It stands for Delivered, Inspired, Victorious, Anointed. Not because I think I'm all that, but because I know that God is. You can catch me on Instagram at Divatude, Diva 2DE. I'm also on TikTok where I do a daily inspirational video called Morning Coffee with Diva. And you can catch me on Coast 97.3, 5:45 a.m., where I also do the same radio show.
Awesome. Miss Dee, I want to reconnect at some point. I need some auntie loving.
Well, you get my address. You're welcome to drive up here. I got a whole empty room.
Oh, wonderful.
Hmm
I appreciate your time.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks, Miss Dee. You too. Thank you for listening to Quiet as It's Kept podcast. I want to thank Reverend Dierdre Parker for joining us. I always feel better after talking with her. Next time, I want to talk about the stuff that this piece is really about. We'll be focusing on why stories of sexual trauma are kept quiet in Black communities and how we intend to shed light on these stories through dance. We'll also be joined by my friend, Franchan Francis, who is a mental health and trauma specialist. She understands the issues of sexual trauma in Black communities as well as anybody out there, so I'm super grateful to have her on the show. Until then, this has been Quiet as It's Kept. Our episodes were produced by Joey Lieberman and Nick Saberla. Quiet as It's Kept is a production of the nonprofit Arts and Education Center Narrative Arts. You can learn more about our work at narrativearts.org. You can also learn more about Techmoja at techmoja.org. That is TECHMOJA.org.